But actually, I think this is quite timely because a lot of funding for Diagnostics Digital Capability has just been released notionally out into the ICBs, but ultimately, actually, it will be providers like yourselves that will be using that money. So the ICB is really a kind of filter through organization. In this case, they might be doing some coordination type work with trusts, but it will be trusts that will be delivering on these programs. So I thought what I'd do then is spend some time just talking through the Diagnostics Digital Capability process, where we've got to now, and therefore what you might want to do next. So just to get a quick show of hands before we start, just a yellow hand. How many of you are aware of DDC funding, Diagnostics Digital Capability funding? Great. Can see a few. That's brilliant. Excellent. Okay, thank you. And so what happens then, and I think this can be a somewhat annual affair, is every year there's a sum of money that's allocated by the government towards Diagnostics Digital Capability. So what they've done this time round is it started in 2025. They've looked at a 4-year envelope, and they've assigned something like £500 million to that programme. So it's a significant sum of money. And the way the programme works is that back in probably July, August 25, something like that, all of the networks, so you've got pathology networks, you've got imaging networks, endoscopy networks, physiological science networks, they would all have received a notification from NHS England to say, this is how you bid for the funding. And then they would go through their process of putting in bids against that £500 million over 4 years of funding. So just talking about Kent and Medway for a minute, it's just an example. We have programs that are already up and running. They've been running for some years, and we needed to apply for some funding to continue with those programs. And then there are some new ideas that we wanted to implement that we bid for as well. So if I just share the screen for a minute, I'll just briefly talk you through the original process, because I think it makes it quite a bit clearer than the talks. So I'll just whiz through it, but essentially the interesting bits are here. So these were the timelines. By the 14th of November, we had to submit our initial work streams. These are the diagnostics work streams we want to bid against. By the 28th of November, we needed then a full regional applications. So that was the much fuller description. And then after that, the regions would go away and say, well, we know that we've got, say, £50 million this year. We've had £200 million worth of bids. So we're going to make a submission to the national team to say these are the ones we want to prioritise. And then the national team makes a business case to go to ultimately the government to say this is what we want to spend our £500 million on. I must say I can't see hands now, so if you've got it's because I'm sharing the screen here. If you've got a question, please call out. So that's the process. And these were the work streams, and this is hopefully where it becomes a little bit clearer. So these are the things we could bid against. So for example, in pathology, you could bid against connecting pathology with genomic systems, with blood and transplant systems, etc. You can read down the list yourself. So imaging, delivering networked imaging systems, optimizing MRI productivity, and then this whole bank at the bottom around optimizing diagnostic pathways. And you can see they sit across all of those networks in some of the cases. So the process then we followed in the southeast was twofold. We had established networks. So to use the Kent Medway example, here we've got a pathology network, very well established. They've got their own board, their own governance structure, their own finance teams, their own digital delivery team, and they would largely then take care of that pathology element, putting in those bids for pathology. They also actually taking charge of a couple of the imaging bids in Kent and Medway that are ongoing processes. We then had imaging, so we've got a big AI group in Kent and Medway, and you can see on the table there, for example, 11A and 11B are all about AI in radiology. So that was great. So we'd already lined ourselves up, had the conversations. We've got a strategy for Kent and Medway, and that allowed us to really put in some good bids for AI in radiology. Physiological sciences is an interesting one. So we haven't got a cohesive network as we do in pathology. We haven't got that whole governance structure and arrangements. So what we did is an expressions of interest piece that went out across the southeast. If you work in physiological science and you could bid for some of these things here, optimizing pathways, etc., what are the items that you would wish to bid for? And we had around 30 expressions of interest from across the southeast for physiological sciences. So actually it was a really helpful process because it allowed us to bunch some of those things together. So we had a lot of requests, for example, to look at this 10B item here, optimizing referral requests and results management. We heard from a lot of people in physiological sciences that actually we could really use a better way of referral, patient management, managing results, etc., in our services. And then the crucial point is then that although that was a southeast wide expression of interest, it would have been your ICBs then, or networks, your kind of local systems that would have put the bids in. So what I would be expecting is that in each of so we had 6 ICBs at the time, and I hope you're all familiar with which your ICB you're aligned with. Your ICB should have submitted bids against these funding work streams here. So and I think, is there anything else to share on this? There's some timescales there. Yeah, that's the same slide. Okay, so what we could do now is move on to the outcomes. What was the outcome from that funding process? Before I do, has anyone got any questions about the bidding process? Okay, so let me share the outcome here. So this is for Kent and Medway. So I don't know what's happened in the other ICBs, but it's really useful to have a chat about this because I'm hoping that the next steps might be that you look at this and think, well, we might have received this kind of funding in our ICB. Let's say I live in Surrey. So there's a Surrey ICB, which is now Surrey and Sussex. So you could find your ICB and ask them, did you bid for DDC funding in imaging, physiological science, in pathology or endoscopy, and what were the outcomes? Because now's the big time when the money comes available and we put it into use. So I'll just share the Kent and Medway outcomes here. So I haven't put any numbers on this deliberately, But if you add together the total funding across all of these funding awards, it's £14 million. So you can see that's quite a lot of money. And sure enough, I have lots of interests. I'm a very popular person at the moment. I have a lot of people who want to meet to talk about the £14 million and how they think we can spend it. So, which is a great position for us to be in. So just to look at some of these in a little bit of detail, because I think this might give you an insight into the kinds of things that you go and talk to your ICBs about. So the pathology ones we got here, you can see these are quite big ticket items, things like delivering a LIMS system, digital pathology. There'll be a lot of detail behind the programs there, but they're obviously major items. So LIMS is the equivalent of the radiology information system. It's the system with all of the patient information and requests and reports on there. If we look at imaging, so we got some funding for optimizing MRI productivity. So you'll be aware possibly of the AAT software, which is AI-based advanced acceleration technology. So we can use AAT software on an MRI scanner to make our scans faster without losing any quality of image. So it's a little bit complex because you can't just put it there and switch it on. You need a team of people, medical physics. You'd need radiologists, radiographers, and they would have to look at how do they safely implement that AAT software. So we got some money to do that and look at an optimization program across all of our acute providers in Kent and Medway, which is exciting. You're looking at, I think the government figures are 1,300 additional scanning slots per scanner by implementing AAT software completely. So in somewhere like Kent and Medway, we've got 12 eligible scanners. So you can do the maths yourself, but you're looking at 13,000 more scanning slots per year, which is it's a really exciting prospect. Again, you've got some of our standard things here, implementing iRefer, which is the referral software that people can use when they're referring into radiology. And we've got some products that some of the trusts were interested in. NetCall is a system for sending text messages to patients. And you're starting to see then some kind of more niche areas. So I think you might classify LIMS and digital pathology. They're big areas, aren't they? Going to be delivered on a large scale over a network. Something like NetCall, that would be an individual trust that would be looking at that. But of course, you could deploy that across other trusts if that's successful. The infrastructure upgrade and integration piece here is actually, this is another point to make, a little bit hidden, because what's behind that one, that's PS7, is linking our cardiac systems, imaging systems. So that could be the catheterization labs themselves, the X-ray machines, and the ultrasound machines that do echocardiography, linking those to the PACS network. So instead of having a sort of local archival solution based on a computer, nobody outside of the department can see the images. It's linking them up to that PACS network so the images are stored more sustainably, and they're much more readily able to share those images. And that will open up all sorts of clinical pathways. For example, our cancer clinicians really need to see some of that echo patient work, and at the moment they're burning discs and sending them out, and there's the IG, there's the risk that things get lost, or but once they're on a PACS network, obviously it's a much smoother process. The audiology one here is interesting. So This came from a lot of physiological science departments who said that they wanted to improve their requesting, reporting, and patient management processes. So what they've said is we can't give you all the individual bits of money, but we're going to give you some. They called it discovery funding. So that's to set up a team to really do a proper process of appraising what have we got across. This is for Kent and Medway again. You might have this in your own ICBs. So what have we got across Kent and Medway? Do we buy a separate system for audiology and one for cardiology and one for respiratory, or is there a system that you could buy that could sit across multiple physiological sciences? Have they got similar issues with the way they manage their patients? And it might be that that's impossible. You in audiology, a lot of people use audit base, for example, that has to interface to a patient information system somehow. So it might be the conclusion of that piece of work is that you buy a different system for each thing. But the point is you've got that money to actually set up a team to do a proper piece of work looking at that. So at the moment we're at the stage of looking at how do we spend that money? So do we set up a project team? Do we buy in some people on fixed term contracts? You would talk to your HIN, your Health Innovation Network. So we've got a Sussex version of that. There are HINs across all of the country, and they're really good at helping with these sorts of discovery pieces of work. There's a real recognition, I think, that nobody in the NHS in a department would have time. If you said, "Oh, Mark, can you go off and have a look at referral platforms across physiological sciences?" It would take me years. I haven't got time to do it. But this is funding that specifically allows you to set up a team or use your HIN or whatever it is to really do that process. Using someone like an HIN is really good because they're a national network as well. So the first thing they might do is, well, I'm in KSS, but I know Manchester HIN has already done a piece of work on this. So the first thing I'd do is contact the Manchester HIN and get their results down here. And we use that as a starting point. So there we go. That's a brief overview, just within the 20 minutes. Next steps might be, so hopefully you've got discussions going on in your areas around this funding. But if you haven't heard anything, what you could do is contact your ICB or your networks. So you can see it was broken down into pathology, imaging, endoscopy, and physiological science. You might have those networks in your ICS, and you could contact the head of the network and say, did we get any DDC funding, and what's the process for deploying that? The timescale is quite tight now, so they need full business cases to be, and that has to be approved through the governance organisation to be uploaded by the 31st of August. So if you look at the PACS cardiac project I was talking about, that's pretty complex. You've got 4 acute trusts. We need to have one acute trust that takes the lead on that, takes the money, and works out how are they going to do all those PACS linkages across the ICS. And you've got IT teams, you've got imaging teams, you've got the companies themselves. It's a quite a complex process when you start looking at it. So it might sound like a long time till end of August, but actually once you start working through the process, it's a challenge. And then of course the end of that is they'll look at the business cases and say, yeah, we like that one, Kent and Medway. We think you're going to succeed with your PACS and cardiac project. So here's your funding for that, and off we go and deliver it. So there you go. That's a brief overview, I think, of the DDC process and where we've landed now. And I think then for the rest of the time, I'll just ask if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to answer questions.